By the time the Fellowship crossed the Anduin River, Treebeard was the oldest living creature in Middle-earth. He had lived here since the dawn of his people, over 3 ages ago, perhaps before there was even a sun and a moon. But during the War of the Ring, while fighting against Saruman's evil Uruk-hai army, Treebeard seemed slower, older, and perhaps even approaching his last days on Middle-earth. So that got me thinking, do Ents die of old age, or are they immortal? To answer this question, I think we've got to remind ourselves of the ground rules that Tolkien established for his universe. In Ea, which is the name for all creation, there are only meant to be 2 races of sentient beings that populate the earth. Those are the Elves and the Men. Originally, Eru Ilúvatar, the grand creator of the universe, only imagined that these 2 groups would be born on the earth, and they would be the main inhabitants there. But later, after sending his angelic gods to the planet in order to prepare it for the coming of elves and men, there were some alterations to those plans. Aule, a god of craftsmanship in stone, created the dwarves. Manwë, the leader of the gods, the leader of the Valar, co-created the great eagles. And Yavanna, who happened to be Aule's wife, was so stressed out about the idea of dwarves chopping down all of her precious trees that she asked for Ents to be brought into existence. Now, when Eru Ilúvatar created Arda, the name of Tolkien's Earth, he had a very meticulous plan in place for elves and men's lives. Elves would be immortal, and even in death would be stuck on Earth. If they died, they might be able to even get a new body if they were worthy. Men, on the other hand, would be mortal, and after death, their souls would go on a great adventure beyond the physical realm. So what does this have to do with Ents and their immortality? Well, since Ents weren't really part of the plan, we don't really know what happens to them. The best we can really do is listen to what Treebeard and Gandalf had to say on the issue. When talking about Treebeard, Gandalf mentioned how old the Ent was, and even Treebeard said that he remembered the time when the elves first taught language to the trees. That might have been during a period known as the Years of the Trees, a time before the sun and moon, a time before the actual first, second, and third age, a time when Melkor still ruled Middle-earth. It was during that age that all of Ilúvatar's children, the elves, men, dwarves, and Ents, came into being. This was about 12,000 years before the Fellowship left Rivendell to destroy the One Ring. Now, during that span, a lot changed. Middle-earth, which was once so thickly carpeted in forest that you could travel from the Great Sea to Rivendell simply by running along tree branches, had been stripped of much of its woodlands. The Ent wives, including Treebeard's wife, were destroyed by Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance during the Second Age, and the encroaching cities and agricultural lands of men reduced the Ent population to at most around 50 Ents. And for their part, the Ents were changing too. While the Ents could be killed in unnatural ways, by fire and combat, there was another way that Ents seemed to die. When Ents became old, bored, or perhaps simply outgrown their use, they became sedentary. And as they spent more time still, absorbed in their own thoughts, they became more and more like trees, until one day they were just that. Now, we don't really know if this meant that the Ents would succumb to the natural cycle of death that afflicts normal trees. And for all of our botanist nerds out there, I know some of you will tell me trees don't really die of old age. They die of other things like stress or disease or something else, but not technically old age, which I'll say fine. But if we're just going to rephrase the question, then can Ents die of the things that normal trees die of? And I'd wager yes, they can. The trees of Middle-earth are old, but we've seen rotten wood and fallen limbs often enough to know that they can die. And if that's the case, then Ents who have become tree-like can die too. But I suppose, what about a fully mobile Ent like Treebeard? Are they immortal, or can they die from old age too? If we look at a quote from Gandalf, I think we can find the answer. When referring to the start of the Fourth Age, Gandalf remarks that the future will be for men, and that the kingdoms of men will even outlast Treebeard. I don't think Gandalf was insinuating that Treebeard would die from something unnatural like an axe to his trunk or something. I think instead Gandalf was just saying that obviously men will be around for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, and of course that would be much longer than the life of Treebeard. It had only been 8,000 years or so since Treebeard had been born, and he was already pretty haggard, pretty old. So when we ask if Ents are immortal in the same way as elves, I think we sadly have to say no. Ents are incredibly long-lived, and they can walk around for thousands of years, but in the end, perhaps their natural fate is to become simple trees again.